Today on ASCENT, the Great Books Podcast, we're continuing our journey through Sir Gawain and the Green Knight by discussing Fits 2 and 3 with Dr. Tiffany Schubert of Wyoming Catholic College, alongside our friends from X, George of the Chivalry Guild and Banished Kent. It's an excellent conversation on many different themes. We talk about time. We talk about the mysterious pentangle that's on the outside of Sir Gawain's shield. We talk about what's inside the shield, which is probably even more important. We talk about the balance of the chivalric and the Christian, which really kind of permeates the entire text. And we also have a lively conversation on the temptation scenes, the famous temptation scenes in Fit 3. Also, we have a fantastic resource for you guys. So if you haven't checked this out already, we have a 30-page, 50 question and answer guide to Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It goes into deep detail about this beautiful poem. It has preliminary questions that you should ask yourself before you read each fit, with citations of where those answers can be found. So you can use this for you and your small group as you guys have these conversations. And then it has question and answer drawn from the wisdom of the podcasts to help you read this phenomenal text. So if you want a little bit of extra help, go check out our Patreon page for this 50 question and answer guide to Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. But today, we're going to have a wonderful conversation with Dr. Tiffany Schubert of Wyoming Catholic College and our two friends from X on Fits 2 and 3 of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Welcome to ASCENT, the Great Books Podcast. My name is Deacon Harrison Garlick. I'm a husband, father of 5, and serve as the Chancellor and General Counsel for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Tulsa. We're recording on a beautiful afternoon here at the Chancery. If you're new to ASCENT, we're a weekly podcast that helps guide you through the great books. For example, if you want to read the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Greek plays, Dante's Inferno, or Plato, we have podcast videos and written guides to help you or your small group read these great books. Check us out on X, YouTube, Facebook, and Patreon. We appreciate all our supporters who have access to community chats and also to written guides, a whole library on the great books. Visit thegreatbookspodcast.com for a reading schedule and more information. Okay, great. Now, we're taking our break from the Platonic dialogues and reading Sir Gawain and the Green Knight for Christmas. Last week, we had an excellent conversation on part 1, or Fit 1, of the poem with Dr. Justin Jackson out of Hillsdale. And today, we are discussing Fit 2 and 3 of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And we have an excellent guest to guide us through this text. We have Dr. Tiffany Schubert, who is the Associate Professor of Humanities and the Trivium at Wyoming Catholic College. Dr. Schubert, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to discuss this poem.
Yeah, and also Fit 2 and Fit 3, they were excellent. I have lots of questions. I really love this poem, but maybe before we begin, tell us a little bit about your own scholarship and also your familiarity, your history with this text.
Sure. So I am an English major, graduated from Hillsdale College, where I did my undergrad, and then I studied literature at the University of Dallas. And my particular area of focus is actually kind of the long afterlife of the Middle Ages. I'm fascinated by the way that medieval romance shaped the modern novel, and especially interested in the relationship of Jane Austen to the medieval romance. It's kind of my absolutely right, very particular scholarly niche right there. But I like to say I'm sort of a divided soul. I love the modern Georgian novel, and then I love the Middle Ages. I kind of straddle both of those worlds. I first read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight as an undergrad at Hillsdale, actually with Dr. Jackson, whom you all had on the podcast last week. And then I taught it quite regularly at the University of Dallas. It's part of the core curriculum for the freshmen. It's a really wonderful text to pair with the ancient epics. It's kind of a fun addition there. And then I also taught it at Wyoming Catholic College, where I currently teach right now. I taught it in our medieval course, and that was a course that had Boethius, Augustine, and Dante, and then we would end the course with Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And I loved to have Sir Gawain in that course because right, Dante and Boethius and Augustine, they take us on these incredible journeys out of sin, darkness, confusion, disorder, chaos, right, into virtue and perfection and order and beauty and light and the unity with God and the divine. But for example, right, by the time you get to the end of Paradiso, the air up there is really thin. It's kind of hard to breathe. And I always loved ending with Sir Gawain and the Green Knight because this is a poem that brings you back down into this world, which is maybe a funny thing to say about this poem, given the fact that we've got the magical, the marvelous, the wondrous, and the eerie. But I think this is a poem that is very, very attuned to this life, right, and living this life well, at least by confronting the fact that you are a being in an incarnate, murky, confusing kind of a world. I've always loved that sort of pairing there. And then I have drawn some on Sir Gawain and the Green Knight for my own scholarship. I'm fascinated by the use of irony, the use of irony in medieval texts and also in novels. And so I've sort of looked at Gawain to think about the way that irony works. It's a deeply, profoundly, kind of endlessly, wonderfully ironic poem there. And so I have appreciated it as a scholar for that reason.
Yeah, beautiful. Well said. I should also mention this week we have George of the Chivalry Guild from Chivalry Guild on X joining us again, and also Banished Kent. Go check out his account on X as well. Before we get into the text, I just one preliminary that I always have to mention. So George on Chivalry Guild has a lot of really excellent quotes and posts because he's always posting about the chivalric, about horsemanship. And Wyoming Catholic, I can't let it go without mentioning that you all have horsemanship built into your core curriculum. So if you come to Wyoming Catholic, you have to learn how to ride a horse. Like, do you participate in this? Do you have to learn how to ride a horse to become a professor at Wyoming Catholic? Or why do you guys do this?
Yeah, right. It's actually part of the job interview. You have to lasso a camel and also then yeah and simultaneously mount a horse in full armor.
Good. That sounds good. I actually could really see the good Father Deacon, Kyle Washit, out there judging you and marking you up on your horsemanship as part of the interview process. But this is really interesting. We had Dr. Pavlos Papadopoulos on a little to talk about the Odyssey, and we've also talked about he's already recorded with us actually on the Republic as well, because we're jumping into that next year. But one of the things I'm just really fascinated is, like, when you look at particularly like the raising of children. Like, my daughter is involved in barrel racing, right? So she goes to like rodeos and does the barrel racing. And for a child to actually grow in virtue, like if you read any of the texts, it's horsemanship. This is before sports, this is before these kind of things. It was horsemanship that taught you like how to have the prudence, the fortitude to control another animal, to get it to do what you want it to do, that kind of intuition. Like, why do you guys have horsemanship as part of your curriculum?
So we're so focused on not just the intellectual life, but also helping our students kind of take ownership for their own intellectual life and also just right ownership of their own lives. And so what does it mean to become a leader of souls, right? In the kind of the intellectual realm, a leader of souls and bodies, more so in our outdoor program. But also I think right, horsemanship sort of asks our students to not just meditate on, but actually right, just experience what it is like to be a leader of an animal. And here I'm drawing on many things that our horsemanship instructors say, nothing of my own. There's this unique relationship, right, that you have between a man and a beast, a man and a horse, that is very different from like one man to another man, then also really wildly different from the relationship that a man has to a machine. And so what is it like to govern and lead a being who has a soul, not a rational soul, right? But who has a soul, who has a will, who has desires, right? But is not, right, is not human, is not rational, but then is not the machine, right? Where you can just easily manipulate it. And so it requires a confidence in your own authority as a human being, while simultaneously a deep and profound awareness of the nature of the horse, right? That the horse has a nature that's pushing back against you and that you're working with. And so it's a really profound leadership experience for the students. It also does fit so well with our Western ethos. We are a small college out in the West. We have the gorgeous Wind Mountains surrounding our town. So many of our students have ranching, livestock farming kind of experience there, and so something right about the horse speaks to that, and of course the literary, the poetic kind of dimension, right, of horsemanship too. It's a knightly quality, right, or attribute or association, right, that we have there. Oh, of course, right, even in the Iliad, we have, right, Hector, who is the breaker of horses, right? Then that's the last line of the Iliad. So that epic cosmos that our students enter into so early at Wyoming Catholic College, then they're having a kind of experience of that with their horses, with the horses.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, very well said. I actually really like the juxtaposition that you gave between the man's relationship to a horse, to a beast, versus like a machine. Like, that's a fantastic juxtaposition to present. George, anything on horsemanship real fast before we jump into the text? Because I know you comment a lot about this on X.
No, I just found that incredibly stirring, and just want to say God bless you and everybody at Wyoming Catholic. That is so wonderful.
Yeah, I can't really imagine going to a college like Wyoming Catholic. I think about like what I was doing in high school and college, and then like having a place like that. It's just, yeah, I very much appreciate that a place like Wyoming Catholic exists. I have heard like stories about the camping that freshmen have to do, and like going out in the winter, and like, you only can have so many of them die in the Wyoming winter every year. That's great. Like, it's a wonderful retreat that you have.
That's where we have a really great success rate.
It's good. The retention rate of freshmen in the camping retreat is decently high. That's good. I would love to do insurance for Wyoming Catholic. This sounds fantastic. Okay, anyway, we're getting into the text. Okay, so fit 2. And so one of the questions that I had is one of the things I'm trying to track, particularly after the conversation last week, is the relationship of time. So we have this time throughout the text, and we get a lot, because the poet here gives a lot of commentary, not only on the passing of the seasons, but also, there's kind of a thick liturgical veneer on the time as well. We get Michaelmas and a few other things. And so inside this context of time, like, one of the things that I was really curious about is that Gawain lingers. He stays here. It says at the beginning of stanza 24, it says that he lingers with King Arthur. And I didn't know like exactly how to read that, like whether we take that as he should have left, because he doesn't know where he's going. He has to go out and find it. It's not like he actually knows, like, oh yeah, it will only take me 90 days to ride my horse, over to the Green Chapel. He doesn't actually know where he's going. And so I thought it was really interesting that he lingers there, and whether or not, as we see this kind of passing of the time, whether or not that's something that we lay at his feet as a critique or not.
Yeah, my first thought is that that's so connected to the lingering that we see in fit 3, where he's lingering in bed. He's at his ease, and it's that condition where he is tempted, or he's most in danger, is when he's in the castle, in the bedroom, in the sumptuous bed, right, in his sumptuous clothing, so yeah, lingering and at ease there. So there may be a kind of suggestion that he's, right, yeah, maybe not quite as zealous as he should be, although the rest of the court is so hesitant to let him go too. Right? We're told that they're deeply saddened by this. The court, at least, actually thinks, right, that maybe there was something off in Arthur's willingness to agree to this game, Arthur's quickness to interpret the ambiguity of the Green Knight as clearly a martial threat. That maybe it was some sort of pride in Arthur, and it's kind of a waste of Gawain to allow him to be sent off into, or on this quest. So at least from the court's perspective, they're not actually seeing this lingering necessarily as problematic, because the whole quest game engagement contraction between him and the Green Knight seems unnecessary. It didn't actually have to happen. Unnecessary and perhaps even wasteful. So I think it seems to be right that there is some ambiguity here. Yes, you would want Knight to go out immediately, so to speak, right away on his quest, and yet is this actually a worthwhile quest for the Knight to be engaged in?
I would also say that I think that the first couple of stanzas here in this fit point to the possibility that there's some significant symbolism in the timing of his departure. Right, he's leaving on All Hallows, naturally a point in the liturgical calendar that's going to point towards thoughts on, considering one's mortality, considering that death must come. We have this beautiful segment where we're describing the weather in the world over the course of the year, right? And we say that, the harvest hurries in and it warns before winter to wax to ripeness. And then we're told after that, then that prompts Gawain to give grievous journey thought. And so I think that the poem kind of points towards the symbolic timing of his nature, that, just as nature has points that point us towards remembering our coming doom, our coming death, that the liturgical cycle also points us towards that. And I think the timing of his leaving points towards that there's seasons in one's life where we're going to naturally start to ponder on the fact that we're not going to live forever, and we have to kind of memento mori a little bit.
Do you have a different departure time in mind? When would you have left if you had to go on this quest to find this place that you don't know the location of?
Well, these are all good points. So I like Kent's reading, or at least suggestion, that there are seasons for things. And so there's a liturgical year, then that lingering is not necessarily like a negative, but rather there's a fitting time for him to leave. And the liturgical year provides this like structure to time. Time, right, is not simply the seasons, but it's also the liturgical year, that Christ has actually given a certain infrastructure to time itself because of the incarnation. And so then every year is this cycle in which we participate in the life of Christ, but then it's also moving forward. I think Professor Jackson last week talked about it as like a spiral going forward. So I like that. I guess what struck me was really just a mundane thought of, you have agreed to do this quest. You don't know where you're going. And so he seems to be lingering when really you would think for him to accomplish this thing, he really has to just leave almost immediately to go on his journey to figure out where the Green Chapel actually is, right? This isn't Frodo going to Mordor. He doesn't actually know where he actually is supposed to go. So that was just one thing that struck me. I'm not in a huge rush to lay it as a heavy critique at, Sir Gawain, but rather it was something that, because of time. And I really liked two things that Dr. Schubert mentioned, which is one, can we tether it to the lingering that we'll see in Fit 3 of him in his bed? I think that's really fascinating. So the second point that Dr. Schubert made that I thought was really fascinating is tethering it to the court's critique of Arthur. Mm-hmm. Because that's something that I wasn't really sensitive to until last week's podcast, when we're reading back through this, looking at that critique of, is he lingering then? Should he be in a rush to do something if that, at least in part, it's a folly? That this is kind of an errant quest. This is something that's actually disordered in the quest itself, that he's made this promise to something that maybe wasn't completely well ordered to begin with, and has Arthur kind of led him astray to a certain degree. I'm still pondering last week's critique of Arthur simply telling him to cut the Green Knight's head off. I think George, you made a comment too, and I think I pushed back a little bit, that just like nicking him or something, there's no rule of proportionality in stroke for stroke. So like he could have just, nicked the Green Knight as a sign of mercy, but nothing would stop then the Green Knight from cutting off Sir Gawain's head himself a year and a day later, But would that have been the chivalric thing to do? That also aligned then with Christian morality, not to simply kill him because you win the game, or you presume you're going to win the game, because typically people don't get up and pick up their heads. But now that his own king has told him, hey, cut off his head and you win the game, was that the right advice? So I really like the tethering of the lingering to the critique of the court. I think stanza 29 is when we get that critique. So these are all good things. I think I don't have a locked and loaded answer here, but just trying, I think, to ferret out Sir Gawain and really where is he himself on this quest.
There is something so funny about Gawain's, maybe actually not Gawain's reluctance to fight, but the poet's reluctance to fight, or the poet's reluctance to depict Gawain actually fighting. You're like, right, Gawain actually on this quest. The poet, we have this incredibly dramatic buildup of, or not dramatic exactly, but an extended build-up description of Gawain, right, getting on his armor and getting ready to go. And then we don't actually really see him use that armor, right, or do anything really very exciting with it, as far as we as the readers of the actually see. And so we have these chivalric expectations that are continually deflated by the poem. And I've never really thought about this lingering very, very much, in previous readings of the poem, but it is striking me as a kind of deflation too. Right? Is instead of the knight kind of going out right immediately and seeking and wandering, and us getting 3 or 4 fits of this grand adventure in the wilderness, instead we get, well, he just stayed in the court for a year, and then he went out, and we get a couple lines of his journey, and then lo and behold, he's in another court. That our poet really wants to put Gawain in both the court of Arthur and then the court of Lord Borderlock.
On top of that, in stanza 31, the poet explicitly says, this is not that kind of story. He talks about, on his journey, Gawain actually does encounter worms, wolves, wood trolls. He battles with bulls, bears, boars, and ogres. But then the poet says, basically, so many a marvel in the mountain he met in those lands, that it would be tedious the 10th part to tell you thereof. So, like I said, he's explicitly saying, yeah, I could tell you all this exciting stuff in which he uses his armor and his weapons, but this isn't that kind of story. And I don't know, there's a lot to talk about there as far as, I'm really fascinated in the difference between Carolingian, the French chivalry, and the English Arthurian chivalry, and how the Arthurian definitely leans more towards courtesy, manners, the treatment of ladies, and it kind of seems like this little passage is kind of a commentary on that drift in Arthurian chivalry.
I really think that. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, so yeah, I think so much of that is what's happening in the bedroom scenes when we get to the castle, right? Is this competing vision of chivalry, or at least this possible tension in chivalry? Is chivalry a code of conduct that exists between men directed towards, right, the use of martial violence in service to God, right, the kind of like crusader as the pinnacle of knighthood? Or is knighthood this courteous and eloquent way of speaking, this extremely elevated and ritualistic and even kind of socially rigid vision of love, right, of the knight's relationship, right, to the lady? Or you could put that a little bit differently, right? Does the knight fight for other men, right? Or does he fight, right? Does he fight for God, or does he fight for the lady? What is the motivation for his violence? I think so much of that is all kind of caught up in the bedroom scenes, and this poet is sort of exposing this tension within chivalry. I hadn't quite thought of putting it in terms of the English and the Carolingian, but yeah, I think that's right.
One thing you said that I find really fascinating is, because again, stepping into the author's intent, what's he trying to teach us? He's the teacher here. We're trying to understand his lesson. I think George pointing out that he actually kind of tells us, hey, what the story is and is not. Because I can imagine I can remember the first time I read this, particularly expecting kind of, I think, just a typical chivalric tale. Because the Green Knight, and then it starts off, it gets its head off. This is great. This is wonderful. Then we get this little bitty snippet that's like, oh yeah, he fought trolls and bears and whatever else, and then gone. What I really like that you said, that I think also starts to peel back a little bit of what is the author doing here, is why give us this huge buildup of his armor only to have him immediately take it off? And I think that's really worth digging into. And so I think that obviously one of the most famous passages, I think, in the poem is the pentangle. So he has this sign, this 5-pointed star that is on his shield and on his cloak. And it's very interesting because not only do we get a lot of stanzas about the armor, but we also then get a very detailed, and actually I think, going to kind of George's insight, I think that we actually get a commentary, don't we, of the from the poet, stating that it's worth slowing down to talk about this. Like, we get this kind of like commentary on it. So this is in stanza 27 and also 28. So maybe I'll just give like the little cursory neophyte gloss here real fast of the pentangle, because I don't think it's a symbol, obviously, that people are familiar with. And actually, it's so close to the pentagram that I think most people are actually unsettled by it or put off by it. But we have a 5-pointed star, which has its central point facing up, which I think is important. And each point on the 5 represents another series of 5 things. So this is in stanza 28. And so the poet tells us that there's the 5 senses, his 5 fingers, the 5 wounds of Jesus Christ, the 5 joys of Our Lady, of the Theotokos, Mary, and then 5 of these kind of chivalric virtues, which is free giving, friendliness, chastity, chivalry, and piety. And it says piety surpassing all points. And so the poet really slows down the pace to explain this, I guess what we would call it, this emblem that is on Sir Gawain's shield and cloak. What are we to make of this?
I maybe just want to make one point about the armor. We get so much right. So you're right. So much of a buildup, and then he's going to take it off. But back in that passage where we are told that he goes out and encounters all of the beasts, the thing that the poet is actually most interested in lingering on is his experience of cold. And in that passage, we hear the icicles are kind of like descending from the crest of his helmet. And I wanted to start with that, right? Because you're right. We get such a huge buildup about this armor and this shield. And we think, my goodness, right? He's just going to go and he's going to do the most amazing things with this shield. He's going to like kill 5 giants at a single blow with this shield. And then the thing that his armor actually does is, right, it comes off or it gets icicles on it. It enters into the very nitty gritty world. And then it's removed when it's taken off in the court. But clearly our poet wants us to linger on this image. And I think it's worth pointing out that the pentangle is on the outside of the shield, and then on the inside of the shield is this image of Mary. And so that's what Gawain sees when he is carrying the shield, right? And then the image that he projects out onto the world is the image of the pentangle. So I think that's important. And in thinking about the pentangle is this sense of projection. This is the image that the world sees. And I think that idea of, right, projecting an image is incredibly important for what happens, right, in Fit 3. And the image that Gawain projects into the world, right, I think like probably the association with the pentagram, with magic, maybe should make us a little bit a little bit uncomfortable. Right, there's a lot in this poem that is just this kind of strange mingling of right the Christian and the magical. Right, it could say maybe right the Christian and the Celtic, and how to put them together is kind of, I think, is difficult and tricky, and maybe even something the poet wants us to be uncomfortable and uncertain about. But this image here, it's so rigid, it's so geometrical. It's 5 points, right? And each of those 5 points have this, click down drop menu of 5, right? 5 divisional parts of those 5 fives. And then it's perfect. All of it is perfectly balanced, we're told, right? These 5 fives are they're all linked to another. That end was never. They're fixed. Their force never failed. They're never assembled all on one side, nor asunder either, right? So there's never a lopsided quality to them. They're never divided. They're all fixed. They also apparently have never failed. Never failed, right? Isn't it? I think what an incredible claim that is. Never failed. Anywhere at an end, but whole and entire. So an image of wholeness, of entirety, of balance, of perfection, of competing, or at least an image of multitudinous, an image of the multitude, right, held in a kind of unity there. Perfectly fixed and confirmed, we're told, in Gawain, pressed into him somehow, right? He's actually somehow embodies this image here in ASCENT, at least this is what which we are told. So that's the image, right, that he's projecting out into the world. And it's a pretty striking combination of things, I think, right? That there's the physical, the 5 senses, his 5 fingers, right? That sense sort of just for physical ability, martial prowess, and kind of toughness there. There's the religious, there's the 5 wounds of Christ and the 5 joys of Mary. And then there are those 5 virtues. And those 5 virtues are really pretty remarkable. Now, they can have a very Christian meaning to them, but they are also very, very courtly and chivalric virtues. So the what is united and what is whole in Gawain is, you could say, maybe his physical prowess, his spiritual devotion, and his chivalric virtues. So that, again, those chivalric virtues could have Christian meanings in them as well, but everything is perfectly balanced. Everything just falls together with no conflict whatsoever.
Yeah, I think on that point, I think the thing you said that struck me was unity. So one of the things I think that's this underpinning of the poem itself that has this like internal conflict that the poet seems to be teasing out over and over again, which we certainly see, I think, very clearly in the bedroom scenes, is that the chivalric or this courtesy culture and authentic Christian culture sometimes are not aligning. And so what's really interesting to me here with the pentangle is that here he stresses that, no, all these things are balanced with one another. You have the Christian and the chivalric, and they're all here together, right? In this 5-pointed star with these, you said drop down menu, or these 5 subcategories to them, but they're all held here in unity and in balance. And so maybe, it's an introductory comment, but it seems to me then that the pentangle represents somewhat of an ideal that it seems is probably best embodied in Sir Gawain, but at the same time is one that I think is constantly becoming unbalanced. And we'll see that throughout the text. Even in, I think, Gawain himself, they're not always balanced. And we'll kind of see that in the bedroom scene. There's times that, there's part of me that wants him just to like run away. And courtesy holds him to something. You see this courtesy and this Christian in conflict. But Kent, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I mean, along with what you guys are saying, I think that's exactly right. And I think that's really important that they call it the endless knot. And they say that there's no beginning or end to it, right? So it's not like you can't cleanly say these are the Christian aspects of it and these are the chivalric aspects. It's all tied up together, right? I think that word knot is very intentional here. And so it's not easy for Gawain to separate out. Yes, these are my conventions of knighthood, and these are my conventions of faith. It's all tied into one. The other thing that I was going to say about stanzas 26 and 27 is that they're very similar to the descriptions that we get of the Green Knight in the first fit when he rides in. If you pay attention to the descriptions of Gawain's clothing versus the Green Knight's clothing, they're very similar, except for Gawain's is red and the Green Knights were green. Down to the fact that they both have little birds embroidered onto their clothing and their silks. They're both decked out with silk and fur and armor, except for, well, the Green Knight didn't have armor. That's the other big difference. And so I think that there's intended to be some comparison, right, where the Green Knight is this intervention of nature into the courtly convention. And now we have Gawain, kind of the champion of that convention, going back out to fulfill his end of it.
Yeah, really well said. And I actually don't think that's the last. I really appreciate you providing that juxtaposition, because I did not notice that there, but there's another time after he gets to the castle that I think he is compared in his appearance to the Green Knight itself. And I'm interested in why the poet's doing that. George, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't say that. And Deacon, you were actually getting at this last week. I just want to put in a word for an interpretation of chivalry, which is not synonymous with courtly culture, which is not synonymous with courtesy. Courtesy will be a chivalric virtue within the larger scheme of things. But somebody like Christopher Dawson, in this great book, Religion and the Rise of Western Culture, actually makes this argument that those two things are very separate. And there's actually this really interesting point in history where chivalry is on the march as the Crusaders are on their way from France or Germany to the Holy Lands. And as they are marching, like, directly in opposition to that is what he calls the culture of courtesy, making its way up from more decadent Islamic society into Europe. So again, and that's a whole nother conversation. I don't want to derail this conversation. But I just do want to say that there is the good name of chivalry I want to defend against this overemphasis on courtesy. And I don't blame anybody who has that association. I mean, that's what we've come to assume chivalry is nowadays. But again, just offering up that possibility.
No, I think that's good. Maybe that dovetails into something I'd like to say about piety. So if we're trying to keep the lessons of the poet in mind. We're taking him and understanding kind of a subtle, attentive read. At least, I'm trying to give that to the text. And he says on that last group of 5 that piety surpassing all other points. And I think that's really fascinating. And one of the reasons, if I can just give a slight explanation of piety, I think in the more traditional sense. So piety, like when we read, say, like the Iliad or the Odyssey, or even like Aeschylus's Oresteia, Sophocles' Antigone, piety gives an infrastructure to all of these different texts. And basically piety is threefold. Because piety, at the end of the day, I would say that what piety is it's a gratitude that is born out of justice, but it's for a debt that you can't ever pay back. So you come to be grateful about something that's been given to you that you really can't ever pay back. And the threefold piety, like the 3 points of our lives that this really becomes true, is you have a piety towards your parents, you have a piety towards the polis, and then you have a piety towards the divine. So in the Iliad, right, we see this very clearly in Hector, where he has a piety, towards his parents. He also has it towards Troy, and he has it towards the gods. And what's interesting is that these things are supposed to exist within a hierarchy where the higher governs the lower. And you'll see this tension in Hector at times of like what his parents want him to do versus what he thinks is best for Troy, or what the gods are leading him to do versus what he thinks is best for Troy. And you also see things like, Aeschylus' Oresteia and also Sophocles' Antigone both use piety to set up the internal drama tragedy of their stories. So, for instance, in the Oresteia, you are supposed to be a blood avenger for someone who kills your family. And so obviously Orestes' father has been slain, and so he has to go kill the murderer. But unfortunately, the murderer happens to be his own mother. So does the piety towards his father override the justice that needs to be done towards his mother, etc.? And even the gods are in disagreement about how this will happen. Think about Antigone. It opens up. Antigone's brother is slain on the battlefield. The polis, Creon, says, don't bury him. She says, no, the gods want us to bury him. And there's a conflict between the familial and the political, both disagreeing on what the gods want. And so my point here is that this piety gives kind of like a cosmic structure to man. And you see this, Aquinas picks up, Cicero picks this up, and the Romans pick it up pretty heavily. And then Aquinas articulates it in his Summa. So I don't think we have to jump from like Homer to this play. I think this is very much kind of percolating in Western culture. But what makes it really fascinating to me in this context with this poet is this seems to be the central drama of the poem itself is, and this goes to George's point, is can the chivalric and Christianity always align? And is there a way that they become unaligned? They become disordered and disjointed. And I think we see that at several moments in the play, but the pentangle doesn't say to jettison the chivalric because it's not Christian. It holds it all together, but I think it has to hold it all together in hierarchy. What is the higher and what's the lower? And which one governs the other when there seems to be some type of conflict? And it's just interesting to me that piety then is listed as the highest of the virtues, when piety, I think, best understood, and I'm happy for pushback, but piety, I think, best understood in the great books tradition, the Western tradition at this point, is a virtue of a cosmic order. It is a virtue that governs the lower and the higher as man understands like his obligations and duties towards the family, the polis, and the divine, which I think very clearly is something here that you can then map on to Gawain's trials, is what duties does he owe to, say, his lord and his lady for their hospitality and etc., versus what duties does he owe to God? And when do these become in conflict? So I think it's just an interesting statement that he makes, that this surpasses all.
Yeah, and that might give some explanation for why Mary is on the inside of the shield and not on the outside of the shield. The five joys of Mary, right, are represented on the outside, but Mary herself is on the inside. This is at least from the imagery and the symbolism of the shield, what it is that is governing Gawain. We're actually told that when he's in melee and when he's in combat, he's meditating on or thinking on the five joys of Mary. This is the thing that's actually leading him to fight. And maybe we could say that from Mary as figure there is a kind of union of the Christian and the chivalric, if she is something of, right, the lady who is to be fought for, but she is not the lady, right, who belongs to another man, right, or she's not the lady, right, fought for to be possessed in any kind of way, and she is not a lady who presents love for her as in any way at odds with the divine and the love of God.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Just practically speaking, again, kind of just an introductory thought, Mary being painted on the inside of the shield is very interesting, because obviously what that allows him to do is that when he's in combat, he sees her, as opposed to like if she was on the outside, he can't find devotion in her, right? He sees her on the inside, and so when he is tempted to cowardice or things like this, he sees the eyes of Mary. They lock eyes, and I think this kind of introduces, or maybe reinforces, a theme that we see throughout the poem, is the role of the feminine throughout this poem, in the way that women play a role throughout it. And Mary has these like very important little touch points throughout the text. And I also think somewhat similar to the pentangle, and kind of going back to your thought, which I find very fascinating, that there's all this buildup on the armor and then he just takes it all off. The shedding of the armor also means the shedding of the pentangle. It's not on him anymore. And I think that's notable. And it's also notable kind of as an adjacent idea. that Mary's painted on the inside of the shield, which is, of course, like, as like George or Kent could articulate, this means this is a trial of fortitude. It's a trial of the thematic, of being spirited. You have to have your shield. You're in combat. But that's not the battle that Sir Gawain finds himself in. And so then the shield is set aside, but he's still being assaulted. So can that Marian devotion survive? Can that Marian devotion come in and help him in a battle not of fortitude, but a battle of temperance? And I think that's, so it's very fascinating to me that the poet sets up this drama of the armor and the shield and the pentangle, but then transitions to a very different battle.
Again, right? Yeah, I think that it's supposed to strike us as kind of funny. It's sort of ironic deflation of it all. I have so much attention to this shield, so much attention to the armor, and the carpet that he's standing on, right, is so ornately described. But there maybe is, right, something a little bit over the top even about his armor. So much, like, really, seriously, like, this is the guy who's going to go do battle. He's going to go wander around in the wilderness, right, in this incredibly, right, elaborate and ornate type of armor, right? But then he puts it all on, and then just nothing comes of it, and I think it's kind of funny. This is a really funny kind of a poem, as well as exploring very serious themes, right? But I think it's also, or I could say, right, that part of the way that the poet is doing this, the serious theme of redirecting our attention to, right, what is actually the challenge or the danger, the test for the true knight, right, or for the Christian, is by making things a little bit funny, right, and kind of upending our expectations of how a chivalric romance should go.
I think there are a lot of expectations that he is playing with, expectations of what he builds you up to, and then he shifts. And I think that's actually part of the whole trial of Sir Gawain, is what he's prepared to face, and then what he ends up facing in the intermediate, and whether or not his virtue can endure. So just to push us forward, but also to kind of track some of these themes. So he goes on his journey, and it's interesting to me, earlier you mentioned, is there a blending, or what is the balance? We're getting a lot of these juxtapositions between, say, the Christian and the pagan, or between providence and, say, like the fey magic. Where is this balance between these? And one of the things I thought was interesting is the question of what is actually guiding his journey. Because what's fascinating is that, as we're, trying to not, for those who haven't read Fit 4, not giving everything away, but he has, at least at this time, we know that there's this magical fey creature, the Green Knight, who has precipitated this journey that he has to go on. And then it's very interesting to me that then it's Mary. And I think that's something we have to track very heavily, is where does Mary, right, the Theotokos, enter this text, and what is her role? And that role is like the feminine throughout this poem, is that he pleads to Mary. So at the end of 31, he pleads to Mary. We start getting these prayers to her as he's been traveling through the wilderness. And then by 32, if I understood correct, it's Christmas Eve, I believe, and he prays to our Lord and to Our Lady of, could he stumble upon a house where mass, could be heard. And he crosses himself 3 times, and the answer to this prayer is the castle. And he gives thanks, he gives thanks to Jesus and Saint Julian for this courtesy that's been extended to him. And it's not something that we can fully unpack at the moment, because like all great books, reading it a second time is where you start to see a ton of little connections. But as you ask, like, what is guiding his journey? Providence, this fey magic. It's fascinating to me that he prays to Our Lord and Lady, and it's the castle that is revealed to him, that the castle is an answer to his prayer.
Right, and what kind of answer is it to his prayer? And again, right, what expectations do we have for what the answer to a prayer would look like? Or, put differently, right? The reason that Gawain wants a place where he can hear mass and matins for Christmas, and that's right. That's his expectation for this prayer being answered. His expectation for finding a place. But maybe to put it differently, right? What is it that Gawain maybe actually needs? What does he actually need to be confronted with in order to, again, I think that's a question too, right? In order to do what? In order to live out perfectly the vision that the pentangle projects, maybe to become more aware of the unsettling tensions that are involved in the pentangle, or something else that he needs to confront in himself. So it seems as if there might be some cross purposes here of what Gawain thinks and expects, or Gawain imagines what is going to be the answer to this prayer, and then perhaps what the actual answer to this prayer is. I am right now kind of leaning a little bit heavily on the idea that it is Providence ultimately shaping the events of this poem. But if it is Providence shaping the events of this poem, it's certainly not in any kind of straightforward way. It's not following the expectations of the chivalric world, right, perfectly and precisely, nor is it following the expectations necessarily, right, of Gawain here. He's expecting this civilized place to be safety, comfort, to affirm him and confirm him in his piety. And instead, what he gets is this place of temptation and testing in a way that he never has been tested before. And that's what he gets. And I'm just sort of maybe wanting to stake a claim here that even though he doesn't get what he asks, nevertheless, wouldn't want to rush to say, well, somehow, right, Providence is not involved or Mary is not involved. But if Providence and Mary are directing this show, they have their own really kind of very sneaky and surprising purposes that are not available or known, perceived by the poet, or excuse me, by the pilgrim, by Gawain, and maybe even not really us as readers,
Yeah, no, well said. Yeah, because I agree. I think Providence is what's guiding things ultimately, but how that actually accords with Sir Gawain's expectations and what his soul actually needs in the trials he's actually expecting is very disjointed. But that is certainly a pedagogical lesson for all of us on when we pray for things, what types of answers we expect versus the answers that we need. So I want to push forward. So just maybe just like rapid fire comments on the rest of this fit, just like a few things that I would point out. For those who read the Iliad and Odyssey with us, I think the hospitality of this text tracks really well with guest friendship that we saw in the Homeric age. Notice how long they take care of Sir Gawain without ever actually asking who he is and his name. Now, there's some layers to that I don't think we fully appreciate, but it's one of the parts that we saw with guest friendship and hospitality. I also thought, going to what Kent mentioned, is that when after they dress Sir Gawain, his host does, right, in the castle, they say he's like a vision of spring. And I was really curious as to whether or not that was a reference back to the Green Knight. Because obviously, if you're a vision of spring, you're going to be dressed in green. Green is the number one color of spring. So I was wondering if there was some juxtapositions there. And the other thing that really caught my attention, outside of like the introduction of the lady, was that here, once again, we find ourselves on Christmas. We find the Lord wanting to play a Christmas game. But the first one that he wants to play is so innocent. And if you compare that back to Arthur's desire for a Christmas game, which could end up in like blood sport, there's a really fascinating comparison between those two. That stanza 40, in which the Lord desires this Christmas game. Then, obviously, there's this fit ends with the new Christmas game, just like, oh, we're going to have this trade. I'm going to go hunting, and I might have this reward or whatever I gain, and you're going to stay here in the castle and whatever you gain, and then we're going to trade. I think kind of building upon a lot of the comments that the four of us have made about, is there a tension between courtesy and virtue? Not necessarily, and I agree with George, and maybe I should be more precise in my speech. Maybe the courtesy, but also just the chivalric of having that deference toward your superior. I would be a big fan of the pentangle, but I don't think that these two things are actually disjointed with one another, but they can become imbalanced. And I wonder if this is an example of being imbalanced, where here again, Gawain agrees to a Christmas game that he doesn't quite understand all the terms to, because he's doing what his liege, his lord, wants, when him doing that is the whole reason he's on this quest to begin with, because he stepped into a Christmas game and did what his lord desired of him. So from like the virtue Christian side, you'd be like, brother, why don't you pump the brakes a little bit on agreeing to these things that you don't fully understand? This hasn't worked out well for you. But on the courtesy side, this seems to be some deference to your superior. Kent, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts on this 45th stanza, the last one of Fit 2. And I don't know whether this is just crazy camp thought or whether this is accepted by general scholarship. So forgive me if this is out there. But for me, when I read through this, I think that we could possibly come to see this second agreement, the second game, as a type of symbol for the new covenant that Christ makes, as outlined in the New Testament, right? We have the first Christmas game that by all rights leads to Gawain should be dying, right? That's the expectation. Everyone's expectation as he's leaving is he's going off to his death. And now we have the second Christmas game that we know from the end of the poem is going to determine the outcome of his judgment in the Green Chapel. Spoiler alert. And so I think that we could maybe come to see this as an example of the new covenant, right? Offering ourselves as a living sacrifice under the terms that Christ sets. And we see here in the exchange that whatever, he's going to go out hunting, whatever he finds, he will give to Gawain, and Gawain will find whatever he finds in the castle. So, he's exchanging with the Lord of the castle in the same way that, we're supposed to take upon ourselves the yoke of Christ, as Christ said in the New Testament. So I wonder if that's a way of seeing the second game. I know there's been some criticism Dr. Jackson mentioned last time of, that Gawain's end judgment is reliant not connected to the first game, but on the second game. And I wonder if that's a way of reconciling that this could be seen as symbolic of, Christ's intervention through a new covenant offered to us.
I think it's fascinating. I would like to give that probably more thought. I think it's interesting to tether that to, I've seen Christological reads of the Green Knight in the beginning. So he so for instance, if you're going to do a Christological read of that one, then he comes forward and offers himself, and Sir Gawain takes his life. But then we see that the Green Knight is actually not dead. He comes back. But then what Sir Gawain has to do in response to that is that he has to go on this penitential journey. He has to go on this pilgrimage to actually be perfected. So it's the death of the Green Knight and the Green Knight's resurrection that then precipitates Sir Gawain going on this pilgrimage of virtue and perfection, but also of trial and temptation. It's interesting because I don't think that there's it's not allegorical, I guess I would say. I don't know if the whole poem's
no, I don't think so either.
But there's these analogs that pop up in certain scenes that have a lot of depth to them. So I think, yeah, that's a lot of food for thought there that you've given us.
And just to touch on your what you said about allegory versus symbolism. I mean, if you read in the essay on Peril here in Tolkien's copy, his introduction to Peril, he goes really nicely into this. That there's a distinction between allegory and symbolism, and basically says that allegory, for it to be allegory, it has to be throughout the entire work, right? The whole poem in and of itself and all parts would have to point towards that, versus a poem can have parts of it or characters that have symbolism without tending into allegory. So I think that's right that you said that it's not necessarily an allegory, but there is some symbolism, I think, to be seen there.
I wonder what to do with the remark that the Lord of the Castle has for Gawain. He tells him, and Gawain comes in. He says to him, right, "To this house you are heartily welcome. What is here is wholly yours to have in your power and sway." I'm looking at a different version maybe than you all are, and it's around line 835, 836. I guess I'm wondering how that passage really jumped out at me this time. oh my goodness, right? The Lord has actually given Gawain power in the house in a way. And there will be moments when Gawain will acknowledge the Lord of the castle, right, as the Lord of the castle. But at least here at the beginning, Gawain is kind of given this, I think, in a heady rush. Power here, and I'm wondering how to put that together with seemingly maybe him entering into some sort of second covenant with the Lord that is akin to him entering into a covenant to gain, right, at the behest of Arthur. He seemed in the first, Arthur was clearly the one who was in charge and has the power. And it's, I think, to a large extent, Arthur's interpretation of the game that gets Gawain into the game. And here I'm wondering if it is this promise of things being in his own power that's kind of maybe misleading him here. Right.
Can I add really quickly that line that you read, Professor, that actually sounds a lot like the line that the lady gives Gawain when she is at his bedside. I mean, I can hold off on this until we get into Fit 3 proper, but Tolkien's translation is a lot more vivid, let's say, than a translation I had read previously. So we can talk about that in a second, but if anybody has any other comments on concluding Fit 2.
No, why don't we use that as a segue to get into Fit 3? So lead us in there, and then I'm gonna maybe just give us a little overview of the Fit as a whole.
Well, so what I was referring to was let me find it here. Stanza 47, when we find the lady at, or rather 48. I'm sorry, 49. 49 at the end. So a previous translation that I had read says, has the lady saying to Gawain, "To my company you are welcome." But Tolkien's translation has it, "To my body will you welcome be, of delight to take your fill." That's a pretty jarring way of putting it. We're really pushing the boundaries of PG-13 here. And anyways, Professor's line, does that not sound like what or does it at least not echo what the Lord was saying to Gawain?
Yeah. My house is at your command. It's in your power. My body is at your command and in your power. And so what will you do now, Gawain, with this power that we have granted you? Sort of not just maybe the nephew of the king, the hero on the make, but suddenly the man in the position of power there. And that's a really different kind of challenge, thinking about the kind of challenge that he's actually facing in this poem. It's not, he's the vulnerable warrior out in the wilderness battling against the wolves and the bears and the giants and the wild men. But here, the powerful man with a whole castle seems just to exist, apparently to please him, and apparently, right, also the lady of the castle, who was married to the Lord, but whatever.
Yeah, details.
Minor detail. Yeah, exactly. Minor detail. Also, right, is here to please him, right? The sort of like the temptation maybe of power that's being presented to him here. So that just strikes me as a kind of something different about Gawain's state as he is about to engage in this contract and in this game, and then of course, right, the role of the lady in this game, right, is something, right, extremely important and distinct.
But this is also fascinating because now that I'm looking at this stanza 49, prior to her saying, "To my body will you welcome be," she uses militaristic language about having caught him and having, she's going to bind him in his bed. And she uses the line, "I will govern you better." So that mixture between like, I've got you trapped. You are in trouble now. But then, again, the very descriptive lines about what he is welcome to do to her. That's a pretty wild variation there.
Yeah. And I think maybe just to give us like a little bit of a lattice work as we kind of talk about the details. So obviously what we get here in Fit 3 is we get 3 distinct temptations between Sir Gawain and the lady of the castle. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, this is what's so jarring, I think, even for Sir Gawain, the character, because he's preparing his soul for a certain type of test, right? Fortitude. Am I going to be able to be beheaded? Can I do it without, flinching? Whatever I'm going to have to do here. And all of a sudden, and this is a danger, right, in any kind of like quest or journey, all of a sudden he is faced with a very different type of test. One not of fortitude, but one of temptation. And so we see 3 then distinct movements throughout this. And there's 2 parallels. And I think this goes into George's insight as well. So the lord of the castle will go hunting. And I think very much Gawain is then being hunted in the castle. And I think that's where a lot of that imagery comes from. So particularly like in the first one, I think it's really fascinating because in the first hunting, it has this very explicit thing that the males are not touched. It's just the females, it's the does. And so here we have the men seeking the female deer and just details about their capture and butchery. And again, we have to ask ourselves, why is the poet giving us so many details about this? And that's then juxtaposed to our poor Sir Gawain, who I think very much is also being hunted inside the castle. And I think that's where a lot of that imagery comes from, that hunting imagery as well. And probably, to be quite frank, the butchery that wants to happen to Sir Gawain, right? What would happen to his moral life? What would happen to him as a person, his purity, his reputation, if he actually fell into this trap? So the first one has the deer in this temptation, and he gets 1 kiss. Then we have the second one, in which it's a boar, and he has this temptation, and he gets 2 kisses. And then we have the third one, which is the fox, and then we get Sir Gawain has 3 kisses, but also this like mysterious thing about the girdle. And I think overall, this is where I think Tolkien talks about this too, that Tolkien makes a really fascinating comment that he thinks the entire poem is basically set up for the third fit. That this is really what the poet wants to talk about. The whole beheading, etc., is a fantastic book ending. It's really kind of interesting. The Green Knight, all these things. But really, it's Fit 3 that the poet really wants to dig into. And I think that here, where kind of just to play my cards on this is where I think you very clearly see the friction between this. I keep calling it a courtesy culture because I do see that as distinct from chivalry overall. But when I say that courtesy culture, where you can't be discourteous to your host, you can't be discourteous to your superior, because what I'm thinking of is Joseph and Potiphar's wife. I'm thinking, Sir Gawain, you're an idiot. Run. Get up and run. If you understand you're in this situation, I mean, by this, the first one, yeah, he knows what's going on. The second one has some lines that you're like, okay, you're being hunted, clearly. Why do you keep staying? Why do you keep agreeing to the game? It seems like, again, the courtesy is holding him there, that he can't be discourteous. But the more he then adheres to the courtesy culture, the more he jeopardizes his own soul and his own virtue. And this seems to be just a constant tension in Fit 3.
The way that I put it to my students, right, is why doesn't he just pull a Thomas Aquinas here? Why doesn't he just shove the prostitute out of his room? Why doesn't he just push her out or say, no, thank you, I'm not interested. You're married. This is never going to happen. See you later. Let me get, some really heavy duty locks for my door, because apparently, right, she could just come in at will. But yeah, why doesn't he, and why can't he simply do that? And I think we have the courtesy culture, right? The courtesy culture is part of the Romance tradition, right? It's part of, at least in some stories, the way that the knight is supposed to behave. And you could see where the lady keeps using that, right? She keeps saying, right, well, the stories tell us this, right? All those stories say that the knight should do this, and the knight should act for his lady, right, in this way. She at least has a very definite idea of chivalry, a very definite idea of what it means to be a knight, and her version of chivalry is very much the courteous treatment of ladies, but even right beyond kind of general courtesy. It's the intense devotion of the knight for his own lady. And this sense, right, that maybe not piety as that virtue that governs all, but rather devotion to one's lady. That is the virtue, right, that governs all. And that's her version of chivalry is that. And she continually weaponizes that against him and says, you are not living up to this version of chivalry, right? I thought Gawain was supposed to be this great knight, and you're not doing the things that the great knight ought to do. So clearly, you're not Gawain. You're not who you are.
Yeah, I think it's really important that she specifically tells him in 49, right, that he's known for his courtesy specifically. And he says, you're known for wherever you ride, your courtesy by the courteous is praised, right? And so that's, like you said, setting that up for him that this is how you're supposed to be acting. You're supposed to be giving me this kind of courtesy and setting him up to not reach that standard, I think.
George, what's on your mind?
I'm wondering, is there not also a strategic judgment here that if he takes the Aquinas method and is too unsubtle with letting her down, that he risks offending her, he risks her going to her lord and telling on him? Did you all see something of that? Is there not something of that going on as well?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, but I think that's part of there's two things there. I think one is part of that courtesy culture. Has that become disjointed with virtue? And so you can't actually do the virtuous thing. You can't push away this sin in a clear manner. We keep referencing Aquinas. For those who don't know, Aquinas' brothers put a prostitute they locked him in the tower. They put a prostitute in there because they didn't want him to go off and join the Dominicans. And so they were just going to ruin his vocation. And he grabbed, a hot poker out of the fireplace and chased her around the room until she left. And then he made a sign of the cross on the door. And by the way, now there's the angelic confraternity, which is a group of men and women that join, that pray for each other in purity that's predicated upon that story. That decision and Joseph with Potiphar's wife makes a lot more sense to me. Because that's what I'm thinking here, is that he's jeopardizing his soul. And I think George is correct. There are reasons to do it. I mean, for instance, I think we kind of glossed over it, but why is he even staying so long? And why is he, quote unquote, lingering, to use that term again? Well, it's because he's been told that the Green Chapel is only a few days away, but he doesn't actually know where. So I think maybe to bolster George's point is, what if he's discourteous? What if he makes her mad? What if the Lord gets mad and then he doesn't tell him where the chapel is and he ruins his quest? But again, I think the pushback there is, okay, but is any of that worth your virtue? Is any of that worth you actually being configured to Christ? And I think the poet does a really phenomenal job here of actually putting Sir Gawain between two female characters. Because I think it's very strategic when Sir Gawain brings up Mary. So I'm looking at the temptation in the first, I believe this is still the first one. This is stanza 51. And so she's kind of laying this on thick. And how's he respond? He responds by talking about Mary. Madam, he said, Mary rewards you. And then later on, Mary is mentioned again. If you're falling into the temptation of lust, you're not going to mention Mary. Mary's the last thing you're going to mention. And so I really see him, because what part of the question is does the Marian devotion he has on his shield, is that actually imprinted on his soul? And can he call it up in circumstances that are not about fortitude, but about temperance? And I see here kind of two different things Gawain is doing. He at one point is trying to still be courteous, which means he's engaging in a lot of rhetoric and a lot of dancing. I think at one point it even says fencing, to somehow deny her, but remain courteous, which in a certain way is a credit to his rhetoric, to his capacity inside this courtesy culture, and his capacity to still do his quest and not be discourteous to his host, etc. But then at the same point, he does have these moments in which he mentions Mary, which I think is very much trying to draw probably both him and the lady back to some type of like virtuous plane, which she won't do, but I think that's what he's trying to do.
Do you guys think that he's actually tempted by her? And one of the reasons that I'm asking that is there are moments that do suggest, right, that he's noticing her, right, and he's seeing that she is beautiful, and maybe he's having a response. But the tactics that she uses that seem to have the most effect on him are those tactics when she says something like, I don't think you're actually the Gawain that I have heard of, right? I don't think you actually are living up to your reputation. You don't seem to be exercising that courteous speech, or you don't know how to love a lady. I don't actually think that you're the Gawain. And those are moments where we're told by the narrator that he's bothered and troubled. He thinks, what do you mean by that? So I guess I've always wondered how much, right, is this actually, right, a temptation of lust, right, of temperance, and versus how much of this is kind of going back to that, the projection on the shield there, this projection of perfection. The thing that he seems most weak in, most likely to fail, is his desire to be perfect, or at least, right, his desire to be thought of as perfect. And when she suggests that he's not as perfect as she thought he was, that's when he's most bothered.
Yeah, I think so too. And I was just going to say, you see that in the exchanges, right? That at the end of the day, he's willing to exchange the kisses and give those to the host. But the last thing that he gets, and, skipping ahead a little bit, he gets the green girdle from her. He's not willing to give that up. He's going to withhold that from the host. And that's I think is telling of what the real temptation is for Gawain. And it's not lust, it's not chastity, but it's the temptation to hold on to his own life.
Yeah, I wonder. That's a great question. I'm really glad you asked that, because I guess maybe it shows my own depravity. I just assumed that it was a temptation for Gawain. I mean, here's this woman that also we kind of glossed over. She's more beautiful than Guinevere.
Yeah, that's concerning.
And what does that mean? I mean, we got a few bits ago, we got that Guinevere was just like, the female figure par excellence. And then the second one we run into, it's like, nope, never mind. This one's greater than Guinevere. So yeah, that's really interesting, because at one point you could say, well, you don't want to take away from Sir Gawain that this isn't really like a quote unquote temptation for him. So it's just a game that he's just doing this. He's not really tempted. But at the same time, if Sir Gawain is as virtuous as he is, renowned to be, it might not be a temptation for him. Not because it's not because she's not beautiful or anything like this, but simply because I'm thinking of it in Aristotelian terms, that there's a distinction between being virtuous and just being continent. And so, the continent man is one who would want to engage, that actually would delight in the error, the sin, to use Christian terms, but can actually control his appetite and not do it. Or the virtuous man, in certain ways, is not actually even tempted towards disorder, because he would not delight in the disorder itself. It's not actually appealing to him. And I think that's really fascinating to ask which one is Sir Gawain in this. And I'm tempted, after you pushing on this and me thinking about the text, I'm tempted to think that he is truly virtuous in this. That he's not just simply being continent, because do we get any, I could be wrong, but do we get any textual evidence that he's giving in to this temptation, or that he would like to take the lady, or anything along those lines?
There is a comment back at Fit 2, and again, I apologize, I don't have the same version here. It's around line 967 in mine, where he sees the older woman and then he sees the younger woman, and we're told that the younger woman is more toothsome to his taste, was the beauty by her side. My translation tends to be also pretty vivid and explicit about those things. So there seems to be some attraction, perhaps some sexual attraction that he feels towards her. but I guess maybe my sense has always been that he's so distracted by his quest. That's the thing that's so preoccupying him. He also is aware that he needs to be loyal to the Lord. He's not as vulnerable as he maybe could otherwise be. But the thing, and so when she says, you can have my body, he doesn't then respond, my goodness, I'm so afraid of this offer here. I have to run away. I'm shrinking. Or it doesn't hit him in the same way that when she says to him, I don't think that you are Gawain. And then that's when he's afraid. He's afraid that he's failed in some way.
Yeah, and to add on to what you're saying, Dr. Schubert, I think that's right. And if you look on Fit 70, right, speaking to that distraction that you mentioned by his quest, in between the 2 days, right before the last temptation comes, he's dreaming about the Green Chapel and about this beheading that's coming to him. And so you see that's what's on his mind. You really don't see that indication of she's on his mind, that he's worried about her coming in. No, as he's dreaming, he's worried about, I got to get to the Green Chapel. This is coming. This is, this sense of eeriness is lurking beneath the surface there.
If I recall correctly, and I'd have to go back and look at this, but Tolkien's essay argued that it's precisely because she has worn him away, like psychically, with this offering of her body, that she weakens him enough that she can foist the girdle on him and then secure the promise to not tell her husband about it. That would suggest to me that indeed he is really tested with the sexual temptation. I mean, the question's a really good one. I took the way he really is concerned with the questions about his courtesy to be a really charming aspect of him as a knight. That, of course, he is struggling with the temptation. I guess maybe I'm just taking it for granted that he is really straining his capacity of chastity here to not take what she's offering. But that also, on top of that, the calling of his character into question, I took that to just be a really charming indication of not only is he a red-blooded man, but he's also a red-blooded man who is very concerned about his character. So I want to believe that it's both of those, but I need to go back and look at it a little bit more closely. It is a really good question.
Yeah, one distinction too that I would want to think further on is one of the things that Professor Jackson said last week that I thought was quite intriguing is that the poet is also testing the reader. And so the poet is presenting certain juxtapositions, and if you're an attentive, subtle reader, you're going to hold them in tension together. But we're tempted then to take one path or the other and overread one section, right? So for instance, he talked about with King Arthur wanting a Christmas game, the whole first part seems to be very jovial. Yeah, okay, I don't eat because everyone else is served. That's great. And then I just want a strange story or something. And then there's like one little line, or basically life for life. And I think that I even did what Professor Jackson was critiquing, which is, well, that sounds really harsh. I don't know how to read that. And I just kind of dropped it. And then I read Arthur as this like very jovial, good king. I couldn't hold those in tension. And so one thing here with Gawain that I'm really interested about is we do get some like very vivid descriptions of the women. Particularly, I think, Dr. Schubert, your point was well taken back in stanza 39. Tolkien's one has done stanzas. This is where he's comparing the old and the new. But I would be careful, not to you, just in general, like as the readers, when is it Sir Gawain speaking and when is it the narrator speaking? And do we conflate those? So the narrator does, the kind of 4 lines at the end of each stanza, like he's very explicit. Short body, thick waist, with bulging buttocks spread, more delicious to the taste was the one she by her led. So there is, and I think Armitage has, and I realize his is quite broad because it has a lot of poetic license, but his says something along like more men would like, the younger, that it talks about that they're drawn to her. So I think it's really interesting to make a distinction then. When is it the narrator speaking who's pumping these images into the mind of the reader and setting up this temptation versus what is Sir Gawain given us directly in his own words? Where is he at in this temptation? But again, to echo George, I think that's a fantastic question because I just assumed that for Sir Gawain, this was a significant test.
George brought up, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Dr. Schubert, if you had something you wanted to say.
No, go ahead. I would wanted to kind of go back to the Tolkien's point about why he gives into the gifts, but continue.
Yeah, well, I think that'll probably be along this line, because I was going to say he brought up Tolkien's essay and interpretation, and I really think that's outlined in stanza 71, right, where we're getting to the end of this, the end of the line for Gawain. He has to kind of choose between that Christianity and his, the teaching of his faith versus the courtesy of his knighthood. It says, she keenly and peerless pressed him so close, led him so near the line, that at last he must needs either refuse her with offense, or her favors there take. He cared for his courtesy, lest a caitiff or, a contemptible coward he proved, yet more for his sad case if he should sin commit. And so I think like Tolkien's point, and I think it's justified here in the 71, would be that that's the real temptation, right? It's a double trap. Either he has to commit this sin of adultery, which he's less likely to actually commit, but the bigger trap is he has to offend her, right? And so it's a breach, not of the temptation really isn't so much a breach of his Christianity per se, but a breach of his courtesy, if that makes sense.
But do you think that, Kent, going back to your point, but do you think that his Christian virtue though is in jeopardy here? That if because she says there's a line then at the end of one of these stanzas where, I think George had mentioned this. The lady, this is the end of stanza 58. The lady did not forget. She came to bid good day. Early she on him set, his will to wear away. So the way I read this is, and particularly as the overall theme of the poem, is that by engaging in this game of courtesy, he is jeopardizing the higher things, like his own character, his own virtue, his own salvation, really, right? Of falling into, a mortal sin. And obviously, like, he's very skilled in being able to do this, but we also see that he can falter.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, like, she's been trying to poke and prod him to understand where is his weakness. And again, keep in mind, he did not agree to 3 days of this game at one time. So he already knows that she is hunting him when he agrees to the game on the second and third day. And to me, what that means is that the courtesy culture is very deeply jeopardizing his own Christian culture. And if he would have pulled, let's put it this way. If he would have pulled, Joseph and Potiphar's wife or St. Thomas Aquinas, then would he ever have made the mistake of taking the girdle? Would she not have figured out by that point, after 2-3 days of testing, that this is where his weakness was, if he just would have pushed away? Because we're going to find out, like, this becomes like a significant fault on his end. And so is this like this is the tension that I see the poet is building, is that by keeping and adhering to the courtesy culture, he's actually he ends up jeopardizing not only his Christian soul, I think, but also in a certain way losing the game in general. And feel free to push back.
Yeah, I wonder though what you make of the fact that he is able to deny her request for a gift, right? She says, just give me something, a glove, perhaps. He says, no, I don't have anything worthy enough to give you. I didn't come here with gifts to give away to lovely ladies who come into my bedroom unasked. Right? It's in my other suitcase left. And then he's also able to say no to the ring. She says, well, here's my ring. This is quite a beautiful ring. It's an amazing gift here. Why don't you take it? Why don't you take it? Why don't you take it? and he's able to say no to that. And then the thing that he cannot say no to it is the girdle. And I mean, maybe this is to your point, but she takes the girdle off. It does seem to be this very erotic kind of moment when she offers it to him. But it seems like the reason that he takes the girdle, right, is because she tells him that whoever wears this girdle, whoever has this, right, cannot be killed. It will make him. He cannot be killed, right, by any craft on earth. I think I'm struggling maybe to see how the temptation of lust makes him maybe more vulnerable to taking that gift when he seems able to resist the temptation to lust. He does. Maybe it is a genuine temptation for him. I think that's probably, but he's persistent, right?
I do think he takes the girl for a completely different reason, which I think he's also at fault at. And so let me see if I can articulate this, which these are just raw ideas. I mean, feel free to push back. Very happy to receive it. So my point here is not that necessarily the lust itself erodes his will to the degree that then a different type of temptation becomes more palatable to him. So for instance, you could make the claim, well, what if she just would have offered the girdle in the beginning? What if that was her first temptation? Was, hey, by the way, because why does he like the girdle? Let's talk about it, right? So why does he like the girdle? Well, it's not because he just likes girdles. It's because it has this fey magic about it, and you can't be harmed if you're wearing it. So all of a sudden now he has a pagan out, this like fey magic out to the problem of the Green Knight. Because he thinks he's going to have to go and find the Green Knight in the chapel, and we're going to figure out how that works. But his assumption is the Green Knight's going to cut off my head. And unfortunately, my head does not go back on. I can't go pick it up. So he cheated, if you want to look at it that way, right? The Green Knight cheated by this fey magic. So, oh, great. Now, look, I have an opportunity to cheat the game with my own fey magic. And actually, I have lots of questions about that because I read that negatively. Not simply that he, is it a fault for him to take it? I don't know. But the intent of him taking it, the question is again, it goes back to the question of who's actually guiding this journey of his and who should his trust be in. So if he's calling out to Mary and Providence and these types of things, like, shouldn't he trust in Mary and Providence and our Lord to carry him through the trial, not rely on this pagan artifact of fey magic to maybe cheat the game? I have a lot of questions about that, about whether or not the acceptance of it itself is falling into something that's subpar for a Christian knight. The Christian knight should not fear death like this to accept a pagan artifact that will do this. But my point wasn't that the lust erodes to where that becomes, but rather that he keeps putting himself back into a situation with someone who he knows is disordered and is inviting him to disorder. And so what does she do? She is tempting him constantly. Yes, he seems to be doing great with not temptation. And again, what's he do? He runs off, he goes to mass, he does these things. And also the narrator, the poet, gives us several comments that seem to help us interpret Sir Gawain, where he says he remained pure. He was faultless in his speech. I mean, he gives us some commentary, I think, to interpret the intent and whether or not Sir Gawain has crossed a line here. But on the Christian side, where I tend to lean more towards the Aquinas option, is how long do you keep putting yourself back into a situation with an interlocutor that you know is disordered and is inviting you to disorder? So yeah, he didn't succumb to the lust, but then she realized another path by which she could invite him into disorder, and she did that, and she won. She got him to accept it, right?
Okay. Yeah, I know.
Makes sense? I mean, George can't push back here, but I don't see his. At least I read this as the critique of the poet too, that this is an area where this courtesy culture jeopardizes just general Christian prudence, and that he should have removed himself in some capacity from this, even though he's very skilled with rhetoric and et cetera, to be able to fence his way out of these problems.
Yeah. I think that suggests that meaning the poet, is offering some kind of critique of chivalry, and whether we want to distinguish martial chivalry from courteous chivalry. But there does seem to be within this poem some kind of some kind of critique of some of the standards of the chivalric, right? Or at least some questioning of, can they be reconciled to Christianity, but also can they be reconciled to each other? Right? Can he be both courteous to the lady and loyal to the Lord? Right? That's a really tricky and delicate kind of balance that he's trying to strike there. And then, is courtesy to ladies, can that be reconciled with Christian purity, right, and Christian piety? I'm also wondering, though, if that part of the reason that Gawain keeps putting himself into this position is because it's so murky. I mean, right? Yes, she does tell him, here's my body. You can do with my body whatever you want to do with my body. But he doesn't have his armor on. He doesn't have his shield. He's not out fighting the wolves and the wild men. He's not enduring physical suffering. He's not in a melee. All of the traditional and conventional markers of temptation and the occasion to exercise virtue aren't there. He's in the court. He's at ease. He's dressed nicely. He's fed well. He's in a bedroom. Right. He's from a courtly, chivalric, romantic perspective. He's not really in a place where he would be challenged and tested and tempted, right? And where he would have to be virtuous and courageous, right? Where he would have to display that. Now, obviously, right, he is, but it's really, it's really murky. There's this subversion of expectations there. I think even that's maybe part of the reason you have all those juxtapositions with the hunting scene too, right? In the hunting scene, right, well, of course, what happens in a hunting scene? You have a prey and you have a predator. And, this is the prey and this is the predator and this is how it works. And then in the bedroom scene, it's not where we expect prey and predator to happen there, right? So I think of it as, it's kind of akin to Othello, actually, Shakespeare's play, right? Othello is this great hero and he can do really well in the battlefield. He's a great leader of men. But then when it comes to the domestic, when he's in a relationship with Desdemona and he's trying to sort through, right, the complexities there, he's an absolute idiot about it. He can't actually negotiate and survive in that realm. And I wonder, right, there's something akin to that, right? That just the poet shifts the source of danger, right, from the typical, right, to the atypical. And maybe that's part of what's, catching Gawain off guard a little bit. He's not faced by the giant.
Yeah, no, I think, like we've mentioned previously, I think the shift from a battle of fortitude to a battle of temperance is one that can take a hero off guard pretty quick. George, what were you going to add?
It's just worth adding that when she extracted the promise from him that he wouldn't tell her husband about the girdle, she has checkmated him and guaranteed that he now has to betray one of them. He either has to go back on the promise that he made to her to not tell, or he has to break the covenant with the Lord. So in any consideration of his character and how well he handles this situation, it's just worth adding that they have trapped him.
It's interesting too. I mean, one thing that I think people like to play off a lot of is like, how anagogical are the hunts? So the first one you had like the male seeking the female, and then meanwhile at the castle, the female seeking the male. And then you had this boar that seemed indestructible, not going to fall, etc. In the third one, you get this sly fox. Can the fox kind of, be clever and escape? Well, none of the animals do. They all get caught. It's interesting that then the narrator, the poet, talks at the end of stanza 70, Mary comes back in. And there's this interesting commentary. They spoke, then speech is good. Much pleasure was in that play. Great peril between them stood, unless Mary for her knight should pray. So it's curious to me that as we kind of talk about where's the level of temptation here and the danger for him, that the poet seems to state that he is actually in great peril. And I'm not sure, I guess, I'm just thinking out loud kind of as we play these things together in iron sharpening iron. I'm not really sure great peril includes just a breach of courtesy. Is that really great peril? Is that something that Mary's like terribly worried about? Or is there a greater temptation here, whether that's to sexual depravity, whether that's adultery or whatever? Like, is Gawain, right? Is his virtue being eroded here by continuing to be in this situation? How long can you, fence this? How long can you actually engage in this rhetorical game before you make a mistake? And to George's point, he ends up making a mistake. But to your point, Professor, it's because, again, she shifts. So we have a shift from the Green Knight and fortitude to the temperance of the lady, and then the lady herself shifts the temptation, and he falls for it.
Yeah, and I think you're really right that he really is in danger here of maybe giving into her sexually. I suppose the fact that that's the girdle, that's the temptation that he actually gives into. All right, is striking to me and fascinating. Once again, right, with this poem, you feel, you think, okay, this is it's going to be this kind of poem. Right? It's probably going to be a romance. There's going to be lots of adventures, except for then the poet tells us that no, it's not going to be that kind of poem. And then you think, oh, okay, and now it's actually going to be about his chastity, right? And can he withstand sexual temptation? Or then you think maybe it's about courtesy. Is he going to be courteous? And then the thing that gets him is this temptation to save his life, right? That's the thing that actually leads him to get into the double bind, right? That George is talking about, right? Where here, either he is discourteous or untrue to her, breaks a promise to her, right? Or keeps something from the Lord. But it's that temptation there.
Well, what do you take of one thing we haven't mentioned is stanza 71. So this is right after the poet gives this commentary that he's in great peril unless Mary intercedes for her knight. The beginning of stanza 71 is the first and only time that the term sin is used.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I think that, as we kind of work through this, I don't know. I think I might be really hesitant to say that Sir Gawain is not actually tempted by the lady in some capacity. Because what is the great peril? What is the sin that he's going to fall into? Which again, I think at least the way I do read it is that there are courtesy, these two moral realms, if you will, right? There's the courtesy, the chivalric, and then just Christian virtue. And I personally think these two should align. The pentangle, I think, is great, right? That's the ideal. They should align. But can courtesy become disordered? Can it become bloated? Can it go out from the boundaries of Christian virtue? I think the answer has to be yes there. Here we see then the first and only use of the term sin. And is this something that he is getting close to engaging in because his courtesy is keeping him in a dangerous situation? George, were you going to jump in?
Yeah, I'm sorry to be parroting Tolkien's essay here repeatedly, but it's such a good essay. I would highly recommend to any of your readers or any of your listeners to read this essay. But Tolkien actually says that there are three planes. The first three levels on which Gawain has to prove worthy. Mere jesting pastimes is number one, the kind of things that knights do. Number two is courtesy, the code of polite manners. And number three then is actual real moral virtue. So it's not just the courtesy and virtue, but also then the pastimes. And how much does Gawain actually owe to this madman who came in and made this really strange challenge to him? And then how much does he owe to the Lord who came in and had this kind of strange, jocular, hey, let's make a covenant. Whatever you win, I get. Whatever I win, you get. It is a really fascinating interweaving of those three things. And at the end of the day, Gawain passes the test. I mean, I have to think in any real, he commits certain errors, but those errors have to be taken in the context of he was expertly trapped. But at the end of the day, he does pass the test on the real plane where it matters. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I think I will say that I read Tolkien's essay, and far be it from me to push back on Tolkien. But yeah, he has a very charitable read of Sir Gawain. I think if I understood correctly, and please push back on me, one of the maneuvers that Tolkien does is by creating like these various planes. Then what he can say is that certain errors by Gawain aren't actually like moral errors, and therefore Gawain remains pure, because I think this is what you're getting point to. What is the actual moral error if I violate a game? Like, what does that actually mean? If I just violate this game, does that actually mean that I've fallen into some type of like error? And he kind of does this. He says, well, yeah, Sir Gawain could accept the girdle. There's no reason that he can't accept this from the woman. There's no reason that he would have to tell the Lord that he has this. It's hers to give. Yeah, so I think he does run a lot of interference for Gawain there. I think one thing that I don't remember him talking about that I tend to be somewhat more negative on is why he accepts it, and whether or not I think that ultimately is an error in moral virtue, simply because it's a lack of trust in providence to get him through this. And so he has to rely on this like fey magic object, etc. But Tolkien also does a lot of work, because I think something that's tricky in the passage is that after he accepts the girdle, correct me if I'm wrong if I'm going by the fly here, but after he accepts the girdle, then he gets his 3 kisses, then he goes to confession and he gets absolved of his sins. And the narrator, the poet, seems to give us a very optimistic understanding that Gawain has actually made a good confession. And I think Tolkien points this out as like, well, he's not lying to the priest, he's not hiding the girdle, but him keeping the girdle is not actually really a sin of any consequence, because it's actually just part of a game, if I understood him correctly. And I'm not entirely sure how well I follow that, to be honest. And again, far be it from me to critique Tolkien, but as I try and work through these own moral issues, because even if it's just a game, right, Gawain has given his word to do this. I mean, has he not? Has he not said, yes, okay, whatever I win, you give that? So by not giving the girdle, I think the reason he accepted it is disordered, but also by not giving it to the Lord, I don't know how I wouldn't contextualize that as a lie or being deceitful. Now, is the matter of it quite serious? No, I don't think so. But is it still a moral error? I would think so. I don't think just because it's a game, you can chalk up to the idea that then Christian morality doesn't actually still govern it. Does that make sense?
I think that's shown in Fit 4. I mean, not to get ahead, I know we're not doing that today, but he gets the nick for keeping the girdle and for not giving it up in the game. And so he gets a consequence for that. That's the only thing that he fails in. That's the only consequence that he gets for it. So I do think that there's textual evidence to say that this is seen, or supposed to be seen, as at least somewhat of a moral failing. It just might not be like a mortal moral failing, if that makes sense.
But for a character like Gawain, whose symbol is the pentangle, that is expressive of who he is. From his perspective, at least it is a really big deal. But I think I'm inclined to see it as it is a moment of imperfection from a character who has maybe thought of himself as perfect, and whom the pentangle inclines us to think him as perfect, right, and as perfectly confirmed in all of these virtues. And this is a moment in which he fails. And it's not clear to me that when he goes to his confession, if he's actually confessing the girdle, if he's actually thinking the girdle is in fact a thing to be confessed, because we're told that
he hasn't lied yet. Because I do think the confession scene is complicated. So he goes to confession, he's accepted the girdle. Is accepting the girdle from the lady a sin of some sort, a violation of like Christian moral order? I think on its face, no. There's no reason. I don't know why he couldn't accept it. I do think his intent behind it opens him to critique. And we'll see this kind of later in the poem. It's loaded. Why are you relying on this girl? Tolkien pushes back on that. He downplays it a lot. He says, oh, well, he keeps it, but then he doesn't seem to actually rely on it. And that's something I'd have to think about more, because if he kept it and then realized, oh, this is not really that reliable, then I don't know why he doesn't just give it back when the Lord asks for it. So he at least has to want it, to desire it, to the degree that he's not willing to give it up. To what degree we want to assign that of desire, I'm not sure. But it is very fascinating to me that he receives it. Maybe his intent is to be questioned. He goes to confession, receives absolution. We're led to, I think in the text, to say this is actually a good confession. So he's not withholding sin. So for non-Catholics, if you go to confession, you can't withhold certain sins. You have to say all the sins. Withholding a sin is a sin itself. It's not going to show true penance and forgiveness for your sins. And then he retains the girdle, correct? Because the retaining of the girdle comes after the confession. That's at line, because he doesn't kiss in lines. So the confession is in stanza 75. And then the Lord of the house, whose name, by the way, we still don't know, correct? Which is fascinating to me. It's something to note. The stanza in 77 is where he gives him the 3 kisses that he had won that day. And by the way, it's the only time that Sir Gawain goes and gives his gift first. Sir Gawain seems to be somewhat in a rush to get this over with. So usually the Lord comes in and says, hey, this is what I got you this day. I got you deer. Then he gets a kiss. Oh, I got you a boar. Then he gets 2 kisses. And it's like, oh, now he comes in with a fox, but he's not told that. Gawain, the template changes, which I think we should take note of. It's probably intentional. That actually Gawain wants to give him the 3 kisses and move this along, and then he gets the fox and retains the girdle. The question then is, retaining the girdle and deceiving the Lord of the house a moral error?
I would just want to say that if it is an error, it is not only the most understandable error, but it's also an endearing error. And I don't know, I like to think, I want to talk about this a little bit later, but I like to compare Gawain to Lancelot. And then following from that, you can even compare Gawain to Galahad. Gawain is not a Galahad, but I like Gawain more than Galahad. I am attached to him because of how he does his best in this situation, even if his best is not perfect. There's something that I just can't put into words how much I am endeared to him through this. I don't know. Do you guys have a similar reaction or not really?
No, I think I love his character. And I maybe for the sake of the argument, I've been overly negative on Sir Gawain. But no, I love his character. I think his capacity to keep his virtue throughout these temptations. I think he has a certain innocence to him and purity. He's not naive, though, to a certain degree, but I do find him to be innocent. No, I think he's an incredibly endearing character. It's something that I greatly enjoy reading. I'm a little concerned, and I'm happy to be corrected, and I might think about it more between now and our next episode, that I also don't want to run too much interference for him and keep him in some kind of level of perfection where I think that he does actually error and just simply say, well, this was just a game. Therefore, because it's a game, you don't actually have to obey it. I think that's very rare, particularly in Christian virtue. We do have, obviously, if you make some kind of deal or whatever that's a sin, the deal itself is disordered, you can get out of that. You don't have to bind yourself to something that is disordered. And maybe someone can make an argument that that's what has occurred here. But I do think that the not giving of the girdle back is a critique. And I think what's underneath it more is not simply lying to the Lord, but the reason that he wants to keep it, which I realize, again, Tolkien runs a little bit of interference on, but he has to desire it to the degree of not giving it back. But George, what were you going to say?
Just that I can imagine the priest having said, and I'm not sure that this passes muster, but nevertheless, the priest must have said, or I imagine he said something like, you were drawn initially into this game with the Green Knight, not knowing that the Green Knight had fey magic. So therefore, the initial covenant is kind of called into question. And if you are given this opportunity to bring your own fey magic into it, it just seems that we need to go back and reconsider the original terms.
Yeah. And again, it's not entirely clear to me that during that confession, he has actually brought up the girdle. Maybe he has. I mean, we're told right that he confesses his sins from the largest to the least, but I'm not sure that he actually thinks of the taking of the girdle and the promising to not give it to the Lord, right, or to keep it a secret from the Lord. I don't know that he yet sees it as a sin or as an error. I think that he is making an error. I think he is not a perfect character, and I think that the whole of the story, in a sense, right, is really about him discovering that he is not a perfect character. He thinks he is perfect, and he projects an image of perfection, and not just of any kind of perfection, but right, yeah, of a wholeness, of an integrity, of a unity of the Christian and the chivalric, right? And he thinks that he has that, and what he has to discover is that he doesn't have that. But when he confesses, I guess it's not clear to me that he yet perceives or realizes that he's been untrue, right, or unfaithful to the Lord in some way.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because I'm not clear that, again, the taking of the girdle does not seem to be on its face disordered. Like, why could the lady,
Yeah,
let
right.
etc. But I agree when she has him promise, don't tell the Lord, then it's trapped him to a certain degree. I do think that the intent of him taking it can be critiqued. Now, whether or not in that moment that constitutes a sin, or whether Sir Gawain has to be aware, you can only confess sins, one, that you've done, and two, that you're even aware of. You have to be aware that it's actually a sin to actually confess it. So I think it's just very fascinating that the poet puts it at this moment between these two acts. And I think it raises these questions very intentionally. Kent, what were you going to say?
Yeah, no, I just totally agree with you. I think that it's the intention behind taking the girdle, and potentially the intention behind not telling the husband, right? That, hey, because if he told the husband, he'd have to give it up, and he wants to keep it. And that just makes me think of Matthew 16:29, I think is what it is, right? That he who gives his life for my sake shall find it, and he who keeps his life shall lose it. And I think that's really what the poet's driving at here, is that element of Christian virtue, which is that, you are supposed to be willing to give up everything, and even including your life. And that's the ultimate point to which Gawain is tested, and I think found at fault, which is really the extreme of Christian virtue.
We're really building ourselves up for next week and Fit Forward, untangling all of these knots that we've created. Can I ask a dumb question? Because I get this every time I read this text with people. So I just want to throw it out there. But it bothers people, probably because we're moderns, but I just want to throw it out there. It bothers people because Sir Gawain receives these kisses from the lady, which are very much packed with kind of an eroticism because of the language and these types of things. But they seem to still be courteous kisses, like some kind of greeting or something like that. So that's how I read them. So when he gives them back to the Lord, my understanding there is that the kisses that he's giving to the Lord would have been customary greetings between men, or not. I guess the question is what these kisses that he's giving back to the Lord, are these is there anything disordered or odd or weird or outside of convention about these? Or are these just courteous kisses that would have been given to him? Would have been weird for a knight to kiss a lord in this fashion? Does that make sense? Where is the cultural, it's hard to judge the oddity of the act if we don't understand the cultural norm that has occurred. Because I read them as, courteous on the cheek kind of kisses. But then when he gives those to the Lord, would that have been very odd or not? Does that question make sense? Because that question comes up almost every time I read this text with anybody.
Right. It seems like surely in the cultural context, not so weird to greet your lord, right, in this way, that kind of affection between men, because we as readers are aware of where he's gotten the kisses, then it reads as very, right, as very weird for us. Think, wait a minute, these are kisses that you have received from another man's wife. You are now returning to that man, having just spent a great deal of time in a bedroom with another man's wife. And so, right, so we as readers are aware of the incredible strangeness, the discomfort, in a sense of the origin of these kisses. Right, in the knight responds, he thinks, well done, Gawain. It would be great if you could tell me where you got these from. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Judge, and Gawain says, well, no, that wasn't part of the deal. You didn't demand that I tell you the source. So it does seem like, the weirdness is the fact that he has gotten kisses from the wife that he's giving back, as opposed to the actual kisses themselves. But it does, I don't even think you have to be modern, right, to see that it's a weird exchange of kisses, even if qua kisses wouldn't necessarily be odd or strange, right, between, a lord and his knight.
I also think that's like the comedic part of it, right? We're meant to find that funny, and it is kind of funny, right? It's funny to picture that, oh, here he is, and he's giving him kisses, and he's shocked by him. The Lord even laughs every time that he gets them, and he's like, whoa, where'd you find those laying around, And so I do think that it's meant to be shocking and strange and funny to the reader.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And then, right, it's also funny because he hasn't actually won these kisses, right? They have been given to him, or, right, he's been tricked into them or extracted, by the lady. She's the one who has actually done the winning. She's the predator who has won something, right? But Gawain then is giving the kisses to her, right? Says, oh, here are my winnings for the day, in the way that the Lord is saying, oh, here are my winnings from the hunt. Right? And so that's, I think it's also another level of the comedy too, right? Is that Gawain is sharing kisses that he hasn't actually really even won.
George, are you going to jump in there?
Just that this goes back to what the Professor said earlier. This is a shockingly funny poem. And I was just thinking about my favorite audiobook. There's an actor named David Rintoul who reads this, and he performs it so well. And that moment where the knight Gawain is asked about where the kisses came from, he makes it really it's masterfully done. Gawain responds with this spiritedness, like, no, that was not part of the deal. Be happy with what I've given you and stop asking questions. In this jocular way. It's just a great moment. So, the more we talk about this poem, the more I love it. And it's got so much going on, not least of which is how funny it is.
Yeah, because there's a lot of questions that are raised there, right? So there's the Lord. We've really only been introduced to like 2 women in the castle. I'm assuming there's other ones that are servants, and he keeps getting kisses during the day. You think at some point the Lord would, engage a bit, or be like, hey, by the way, like, who's kissing you? Or like, is this, maybe should I keep going and hunting? Is this something I should keep doing? Right. There's and so I think, and what that does is it kind of slowly, to the reader, if the reader's paying attention to these things, showing you, I think, the depth of the trap that Sir Gawain has actually found himself in, that this trap is actually much more treacherous than I think he even, much more than he actually realizes, and much more than even the reader, I think, realizes right now as well. Okay. So any kind of final thoughts, comments, questions on Fit 3?
But I just want to add to your comment there, the danger, once again, that danger is coming in the form that you don't expect it to come in. And it involves, it's so funny from our perspective, from his perspective too. But there's so much laughter and ease within the poem itself. The characters themselves are, right, laughing and at ease and playing a game. And so even in Fit 3, so fraught, right? There's so much moral danger that he's facing, genuine temptation to his chastity. He's in peril unless Mary protect him. And yet simultaneously, he seems to be having the time of his life with the lady. They're just chatting away, laughing, engaging in courteous banter. having fun and at ease, right? So that juxtaposition in tone is just so strange to me. Yeah, we have the deer being ripped up and Gawain being tempted, and then simultaneously we have, this is a really like lovely and fun experience for everyone involved, and everyone is constantly laughing and speaking jokingly and lightheartedly, right? And so this is it's a hilarious poem, and then right, but even within the poem itself, that laughter or that ease or that hilarity is something of a blind, right? Or at least, right, it is obscuring and making it difficult to see the real danger, the real test, that's here, that's at hand. When you're out in the woods facing that danger, no one is laughing and no one is playing games, right? But we're in the murky world, right? And that's where the lady, right, can come in and seize him and grab him playfully, I guess, but pretty seriously, right? Right? Which one is it? And I think that murkiness is a huge. I keep saying this, right? But I think that is a huge part of the challenge that's confronting a hero whose shield has an emblem that is not murky in the slightest.
Yeah, it's a good juxtaposition. It's probably a depravity of my own read, but I haven't really laughed at all reading this poem. I haven't found, you guys mentioning this, I always tell people on the podcast, like, if you read one of Plato's dialogues and you don't laugh, you've read it incorrectly, because Plato has these like really funny lines. I'm really worried now that I'm not reading the poem correctly because I don't find this humor. But I think it's because I'm overly critical of the culture that courtesy creates. And so, for instance, like the juxtaposition between him being hunted in the bedroom, him knowing it, running off the mass, and then just going and having pleasantries with the same woman all afternoon, and then agreeing to the same game the next day. To me, I just see that as just like, it would be like Joseph just going right back to Potiphar's wife over and over and over again, expecting that he's going to be okay. And at some point that seems to be very disordered to me. But, maybe my lack of levity is probably a misread on my part. So George, Kent, anything, final thoughts on Fit 2 or 3?
I would just say that I don't know if you all had a similar experience, but I can't quite remember reading a book and having a moment like the moment when she tells him the capabilities or the virtues of the girdle. And the way in which, if you have like a cinematic imagination, you can just see a really good director doing something subtle with the camera at that point. There was a realization that was dropped on the reader that Gawain has come all this way. He's facing all this danger, and then lo and behold, he's being offered this thing that is the solution to his problems. It was, for me, a really wild and memorable experience when reading that I will never forget.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Probably also a fruit of just a deep, attentive read, of being drawn into the narrative. Ken, any final words on your part?
I think we've pretty much covered it for the most part. That Fit 3, I think, is the meat and potatoes, but Fit 4, I'm really looking forward to, because I think for me, that's where the symbolism really comes home from the story. And I think it's the most powerful, even if it is the shortest of them. So really looking forward to our next session as well.
Yeah, no, it's going to be good. I'm looking forward to it. This has been great. Dr. Tiffany Schubert, you have given us a lot to think about, a lot of fantastic insights, asked great questions, stirred a lot of conversation. We deeply appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much. It was a delight.
Where can people find out more about like you and your work?
So I have a book on Jane Austen's medievalism that has been published, and I also have some articles in Myth Lore too, looking at the medievalism of C.S. Lewis.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, very good. Well, thank you again for being on the podcast. We really deeply appreciate it. Next week, we'll be finishing up Sir Gawain and the Green Knight with Fit 4. So go check us out on X, YouTube, and Facebook, and check out our Patreon page where we have guides and also a community chat on Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And we will see you next week. Thank you.